Hi everyone, Nemo here. Welcome back and welcome to another Brit Vengers special. And that's all I'm going to say really, because I'm going to bring them in. Let's add them all to the stream. Hi everyone. How are we all doing?
Hello.
Hey Nemo.
Doing
Nice.
good.
Let's check the chat, see if everyone can hear you all. Smashing. So, we're going to skip the introductions because you all know who these lovely people are. We've got Jane from 21st Century Saints, PD from Priestess Dispatches, Lynn and Peter Bleakley, and then Laura and Julian Heath. That's it. I'll let them show their glowing selves through what is going to be quite a wild ride of this absolute belter of a broadcast. So let's start by getting some initial reactions to what we've just seen, which was David A. Bednar and his wife, Russell M. Nelson and his wife. This is not how I described it. This is how the church described it. These men and their wives, and Massimo De Feo and his wife, graced us as European saints with a broadcast. Initial reactions, everyone.
Weak sauce.
Chime in. Weak sauce.
Weak
sauce indeed.
Very
I'll go in
thin.
for a positive to start with. Equal number of men and women. I know that's implied
Yes.
when you
Very good.
have a husband and a wife,
Yeah.
but you know, first time ever, maybe forever.
So that alone kind of did make it historic because you don't see that often. It is worth remarking upon. But I think tonight must really have been based on, I guess it's, coming off of the fact that we've had the British Rescue. I would maybe suggest this is part 2 of the British Rescue.
Yes.
What did they want to cover? What did they want to achieve that hadn't been achieved before? So I kind of think that's where it was going. And did it achieve that?
Well, I tell you what they did achieve. Spoiler alert. It did achieve an acknowledgement of the fact that religiosity is down in Europe. We got an acknowledgement of that. So that's a plus. PD, you're going to say something?
I was going to say they followed the same script of, we come from here. Our ancestors are from here. And they reeled off all of their past visits and holidays to Europe and said how much they love it and that was going to endear them to us or us to them. And it was crap.
American Mormons, I am telling you this as a friend. With all the love in my heart, your ancestors are sick of getting dragged into every talk that you have when Britain is mentioned. They don't like it. We're not that interested. So just, you could cut like a good 5 minutes off your talks right there and get to actual content.
Could you imagine if I started everything from, I remember my great-great-great-granddad when he came across the sea on a Viking boat. And the first thing he did when he got here...
They did do something that they'd not done before, though, with that. They kind of took it one step further with that whole video. So there was a video presentation beforehand that was all about church history in Europe. So they haven't done that before. No. But I don't know, I might be being sensitive with this, but it feels a little bit patronising to me. It just feels like it. The purpose of that is to say, look, you're important as well. You probably didn't realise that God loves you lot too, and that you're just as good as the American saints. That whole thing ticked me off.
I thought the video was interesting because from what I could gather on there, the bits that they showed that was like the heyday, you're looking at Mackay, Monson, Hinckley, which if we looked at nostalgic times, we would probably go to those as well. But then it zooms straight into what we have now, which is, President Nelson dedicating the Rome Temple, which was, for me, a massive faux pas. So what have we got now?
Well, I think that part where they're talking about the church heyday, I think that's actually one of the most important things about what happened today. That's what they wanted to reignite, that spark from the 60s, and when all of the chapels were being built, all of the sacrifice was being made, communities were being really properly established for the first time. Let's face it, as Peter would point out, we don't all still still not all chapels, you know, everyone did not get one, as much as it sounded like that. But, you know, I think it's worth reminding ourselves that time didn't exist in a bubble. That was pre-internet time. That was when, you know, we still had most women were still in the home. You know, there were a whole lot of circumstances that meant that church was really quite a sweet, safe place to be. It's not the same now.
And I think there's a very American thing that comes across there for me, that they implied this sense of, if you just worked hard and pulled up your bootstraps, then you got to build yourself your own chapel. And that wasn't the case. It wasn't.
Although I do think that I think it's probably quite effective. And that's one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this video. But more than the previous kind of British rescue thing, it did seem to have a very clear purpose and drive, which I'll, you know, so you've got Sister Bednar, who, you know, basically gets up there and says, look, England is great, and look, I've got these wonderful miracles that still happen. Elder Bednar saying, you've got to keep all your covenants and stay strong. Wendy that then says, my hubby's the best. And, you know, she's like the introduction. She's like the warm-up.
She's the hype man or hype woman.
She is for Russell. And then obviously he comes on and does his bit where, again, there is a very clear purpose. We'll go into that a little bit later. But when I was watching that video, I could imagine the fact that you've still got a lot of the kind of second phase pioneers of the British church, and I imagine this is exactly the same in the rest of Europe, that are still alive. And I can imagine them seeing some of that footage, hearing about people building chapels and things like that, and really kind of having pride. And coming away from the meeting really quite pumped by that idea.
Not in Wellingward, though.
But their children have gone. No, exactly. But their children have gone, and their grandchildren have gone. And the only answer really they were offering was just be more. It was the hasten the work thing. Just nothing new. Just do the same stuff better.
It's historic.
You know,
fact,
be obedient to your covenants. Just obey us. We're infallible.
I think that man saying that.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm just going to show Elder Bednar saying that.
Brothers and sisters, Susan and I are honored and humbled to participate with President and Sister Nelson and all of you in this historic Europe area member devotional.
There was then no explanation as to why it was historic. Peter, please.
You showed a historic video.
Yeah, they talked about history a lot. We're just misinterpreting the reference. What was historic, and I'll give them this, is what I've been saying for ages, is where if the church is going to have any chance of survival, it has to get out of its death funk. It has to get out of its, the world is going to kill us all, there's only a few of us left, and this fatalism, and we just wait for the second coming, and hopefully a couple of us will be left with a massive checkbook. And they've lost their growth mindset. And what Nelson brought to this was, again, a growth mindset. Now, we can argue about whether the technique to do that will be effective or not. But what he said was there is no reason for us not to still grow, not to have every person in Europe hear the gospel. And I love that because, you know, there's no chance for this religion unless they get back that ambition to actually grow and to have mission somehow reach every person's ear.
Don't worry, the young people, he instructed the young people to do it, so you don't have to worry.
No, he said all age groups.
Special generation.
I know, but this time it did add a caveat of any age, because I think they've realised they told us we were those people, so they want to keep us going, and we're the only ones left. So the young people aren't doing it. So I thought that was historic.
There was a lot of focus on those covenants, wasn't there?
We must grow. Yeah.
And
you know, it's totally delusional, but you know, yeah.
Previously, we had a series of presentations that didn't seem particularly well planned. That, you know, when the prophet was speaking, when they came to visit the UK before, it felt like we didn't have a lot to talk about, that we had been left with nothing. And I would say a lot of that was just a lack of planning, and a lack of, do you know what you're going to be speaking to us about? The fact that you're just showing up isn't enough. Tonight's broadcast was very well planned, in that we were kicking off with a pre-prepared, very, very high production values short historic video. Then we're back to using the auto cue again. These were prepared talks. It was interesting to me that they did take a different approach this time, and it was a needed different approach.
Definitely.
I thought they did really well in opening up a new revenue stream for the church.
Right.
Everyone's like, where is he going? No, seriously. I'm sure they've got the numbers behind it, but President Nelson specifically said that when a temple is dedicated, evil reduces in the area, and he can play that to police forces around Europe. Have a temple in your city, and your crime rates will go down. He must have the numbers for it, because he said it. But imagine if they were to pay the church to build and dedicate temples, and burglary rates across Reading would half.
I want to know what's the radius around it that's protected.
Depends on the size.
How far do you need to build them apart so they overlap?
I think it fades. I think around it, for the mile around it, is 100% effectivity, and then as you go out, it becomes less.
Just petty crimes.
Listen to the people who've all got a temple being sarcastic. Well, we in Scotland have still no temple, and you can mock.
That's why you're all here.
You were more faithful, Jane. Just saying.
Always getting one, you'll get one.
Yeah.
Just a little
so
bit
we
more.
hear.
But it's okay, because actually they're trying to put a temple in every European capital, aren't they? So, it's just that they don't really count Scotland as a separate European capital. So
they're
get that independence vote,
announcing
and then
Scotland's already got one in their capital, London.
Should I put him on the naughty step now?
I would, yeah, I'd kick him out.
I need to go into hiding.
James
speechless.
Local politics.
Charles, get my pills.
Right, so we have a look at Bednar talking about covenants. Let me add that in.
My sword.
Yeah, we'll get Bednar talking about covenants, right? Which I think was really important. His entire address was about covenants, and well, I'll tell you what I think.
Covenants
of it
and
Beloved
ordinances.
brothers and sisters, I invite each of you to read, study, and ponder the Book of Mormon with increased attention to the importance of sacred covenants and ordinances.
There we go. So he wants us to read the Book of Mormon, and he was talking particularly about temple ordinances throughout his talk, which I'll let Peter make his point about that in just a mo. But what I take away from that is that one of the ways they want to try and keep people in the church is keep thinking about the covenants, keep thinking about the fact that you promised to give your life and give up your life, if necessary, to the building up of the church. Remember that. Remember that covenant you made. I think that's what they're really trying to push. But then, Peter, do tell.
Yeah, well, the Book of Mormon doesn't mention any temple covenants. The temple described in the Book of Mormon is the temple of the law of Moses, where you make some sacrifices. So this is the big sort of contradiction, that nor does the Doctrine and Covenants. The D&C and the Book of Mormon don't mention temple covenants anywhere. There's some vague stuff about sealings in section 132, but so it's particularly the Book of Mormon. So if the Book of Mormon is a book that contains the fullness of the gospel, i.e. everything you need to be saved and exalted, yet it has zilch whatsoever to do with the temple, maybe our focus should be a bit more on Christ and some more basic stuff, and compassion and charity as the defining characteristic of your journey forward, rather than what I would call Pharisaical obsession with ritual, with the ordinances and making promises and being guilt-tripped to keep them. And I think also you reflect on how, in a sense, very little, particularly with temple covenants, how little informed consent there was. We were not prepared on what they are. You had 3 seconds to decide whether to commit to them or not in a situation of extreme social pressure. But the promise you made before God, angels, and the witnesses there for each of those things, they will then hold to say, you must make any sacrifice thereafter because you promised to do this and to be faithful to these covenants.
Exactly.
And it was something that happened in a blink of an eye without much prior thoughts. So it just really falls apart there. If you're going to study the Book of Mormon about ordinances, what you're going to find? Precious little, actually. And certainly not their narrative that the temple is the be all and end all at the end of it.
Okay, but if we're saving the church, if we are speaking to people who are losing a bit of heart, who are discouraged, who are unbelieving, or the whole spectrum of what's going on in the UK and Europe right now, if we're reminding the saints how good it was, that previous generation where it was that we're always harking back to, and reminding the saints who are active or or possibly in their way out, I don't know, remember your covenants. Are they worth getting rid of? Are they worth forgetting about it? Is it worth keeping a hold of that right now? And for most people who would have been listening to the broadcast today, it's a reminder. So let's double down on the covenants. Now the problem that I have is I don't find it a weak message, but I find it to be not enough. So you're focusing on the temples, reminding us of temple building. You're focusing us on the covenants. Okay, I made those covenants. I'm happy to keep those covenants. But what else? What's all of the stuff that's missing about how come my friends are leaving? How come there are all these questions about history? Although you've done this great presentation, there are all of these other questions that I have that need answered. How come my LGBTQ brothers and sisters aren't feeling like this is home for them? That's the kind of content I need. Great, talk about covenants, remind us about what's good about the things that we're experiencing at the temple. But we need real substance. Not that covenants aren't substance, but we need the things that we are wrestling with. We need someone to come in and help us wrestle with them.
Those minority groups that you reference, though, Jane, they can't get temple recommends to make covenants.
Absolutely.
So that's just a salt in the wound.
So I can feel great that I'm reminded about my covenants, but I can't be there with my sister who you're absolutely right.
But in
everything that was talked about was for people already faithful. There was nothing there for the people who are wavering, troubled, or left. There was nothing to bring them back. It was just in the feedback loop of the people who are going to be there anyway till they die. Sorry, PD, go on.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, in a church that's become a bastion of rules and rituals, telling them to come to the temple, that's like the ultimate coverall for everything else. Because if you attain a temple recommend, you do it by keeping all of the other rules. So they've gone for the easiest route. Go to the temple.
It's not promising people.
One message. Sorry,
it's not promising someone. I promise you, if you save £1 every day, at the end of the week, you will have enough for a McDonald's extra value meal. It's not rocket science, is it? If you do all of these things that you have to do to keep these covenants and go to temple, then you will be strong in the self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Yeah, and they have to keep it that simple, because if they were to complicate it any more, if it wasn't a repeated by rote thing, then how would all these old men that run it remember it?
I think they come into the temple, but I don't think that was the sell. I thought it was interesting because Elder Bednar's not my favourite, but actually he spoke more about Jesus than any of the rest of them, all of them. So the sell,
which is a very low bar.
It is, but but the cell wasn't temples to start with. The cell was Jesus. He did come in with that because I had to go back and listen to it, but he said, keeping your covenants is simply relying and trusting on Jesus. Now that sounds all right, doesn't it? When we're talking about the people we're talking about struggling that have not renewed their temple recommend, they're considering the complexity of all the to-dos for a temple recommend. They're not getting their children baptized or blessed. They're not renewing their temple covenants. Temple recommend. And so all of that seems so complex, but they're kind of stripping everything back during COVID to Jesus. So the cell was, look, it's as simple as relying and trusting on him, which is what he was saying was part of the covenant, which sounds a lot easier, a lot more doable. So he starts with that as the cell, and then before you know it, then come the layers of, and part of that promise is to remember those covenants, and then you come in with, remembering what you did, all the covenants that you made when you were baptized, the to-do list, the 14 questions on your temple recommend, and that probably you don't think about that straight away, but the connection straight away of lumping the temple in with Jesus, now it's not as stripped back as it was before. And so I just think that was an interesting layer. The cell was Jesus. Okay. People are on board with that because they've stripped back their faith so much at the moment and doing their own version of spirituality because that's what they can manage. And then came in the temple and everything else that comes with it.
Don't think that's what he means. I know what you're saying, but I don't think that's what he really means, because he repeats this idea of them binding us to the Lord. He mentions the Lord several times. He said they bind us to the Lord, bind us to the Lord. But every time he said that, I just heard they bind us to the church. And it's this idea that if you want these covenants are sacrifices, and that it tells us giving things up, and the more that you give up for something, the more you want it to be true. If you've invested a load of money in some pyramid scheme, then more than anybody else, you want it to work out and you want it to be right, because if not, then you're the mug at the end of it that has given it all up for nothing. And so it just felt to me like what he was really saying is all of these things will bind you to the church.
It reminded me
like a flaxen cord
of like a flaxen cord. It reminded me of how you might hear the local imam at the mosque speak to a Christian audience who have come to learn about Islam, because what he does is he starts with Jesus, the common ground. Jesus is in the Quran and is a prophet. He's just not the Son of God according to them. So he starts with that common ground. Jesus gets everyone comfortable with Jesus, and then the imam or the Bednar comes slowly with this list of other reasons we have to do other things and not just Jesus. Because as Peter said, there's no Jesus going through the temple with these signs and tokens in any scripture from the Book of Mormon to the Bible. There's nothing beyond the sacrament. Everything else is peripheral and come in the latter days. And this is why I guess the nub of how Christianity say that Mormons aren't Christians, because they believe in Jesus the same way that other religions do, as Islam do, that Jesus gives good parables, that he may have performed miracles, but you need more. And whether that's Allah, whether that's the temple, we can give it to you. So it's not just Jesus, because you can do Jesus at home on your own.
Yeah.
Okay. You need more. You need the bum in the pew.
Very true.
And I think that's where he was going. He started with that common ground. Let's get back to Jesus.
Yeah. Sorry, I just think that's why they mention covenants. I think that's why I was having this discussion with someone else the other day, because a lot of people, especially when they become very nuanced and they're starting to struggle with the truth claims of the church, you get into this position where a lot of the stuff they're struggling with is unique to Mormonism. A lot of the stuff they still have faith in, you can get anywhere else, in any other sort of Christian sect. Oh, but I still believe in God. Fine, go to the Anglican church down the road. You don't need Mormonism for that. Oh, but so they're having to push and sell and bang the drum about the things that make Mormonism unique, the things we offer, the covenants, those things that are us that we can give you. That's
not
where you
the
need to come to our
interesting
church
ideas.
still.
Yeah,
but
the
it's
rituals, not the big ideas.
Yeah,
it's patterned after Joseph Smith with his. I've had this vision, and then everyone comes along. He creates this church, and at the point that people begin to realize they don't need Joseph Smith to run this church, they don't like what he's doing, he comes up with a new vision to increase his authority again. And it's like that with the church. There's always something new that you can't get anywhere else.
It's interesting how he ends with, because he says sacred covenants so many times. At the end, he says sacred covenants and exaltation. So he's bolted on this extra thing now, and then he starts talking about the authorized channel for where blessings can flow.
It's typical Mormon gatekeeping. Yeah, it's like, well, we're the ones that can make this happen, so better stick with us. Yeah,
because what's
the point?
Was
also typical. Yeah. Bednar was also typical of his usual shtick, which is similar to Russell M. Nelson, that your spiritual journey is very transactional. It's like a machine. If you just do the right things, you are guaranteed an outcome and nothing else matters. So he said, joy is all about the focus of our lives, not the circumstances of our lives. But every time he says that, and he's said similar things in nearly all of his talks, he's basically saying, you should be happy whatever's happening to you in your life. Where if people are abusing your children, if your marriage is falling apart, if you're in poverty, if you're not doing happy joy as a Mormon, that's your fault for not having the right focus. You should be able to just ignore all that stuff and be happy. And it's actually a really powerful negation of the messiness of real human complexity in life. And this is something that President what is he now? Elder Bednar? What do you call him? Apostle Bednar and Russell Nelson don't get. They are so rigid in their thinking about everything and their idea of simple, clear solutions. It's very autistic, it just is. And where you have you see pattern. It's you run everything like a machine, and we'll see later President Nelson talking in that way.
Yeah. I think
there is
President
no
Nelson and his
complexity,
talks
no
slot really well
emotional
together.
content. Yeah,
and someone's saying
they are
here
of the
that
same
Hinckley
mind.
used to call the temple the ultimate product that the church offers, which may have been a bit of a Freudian slip, but I think speaks volumes as to the transactional way in which the leaders operate. Wendy Nelson. Oh, Julia, please, before we get on.
No, I was just going to say, link to what Peter was saying. Was it Bednar that said joy is not dependent on circumstances? Was it him? Yeah.
This has been floating around on Facebook this week. I've seen this a few times on Facebook. I can't remember where, but this exact phrase has been floating around on Facebook a few times this week.
Which is
this idea that there's no excuse.
It's only true to a point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's only true if you're not worrying about whether you're going to have somewhere to sleep tomorrow or whether you're going to be able to feed your children. And unfortunately, we are.
It's this idea that if you don't have a perfect family who've all got married in the temple and all the kids are doing great, like President Nelson keeps boasting of in his own family in General Conference, it's your fault. It's your fault. There aren't any other circumstances that should prevent you having exactly every blessing that the Mormon pattern prescribes. And if you're not getting it, it's your fault. You don't have enough faith. You haven't been exact enough in keeping the covenants, because life is a machine. Just as he does surgery on a body, he knows if he puts this chemical there and cuts here, it will always work out the same way. And he's described that in interviews about his experience. And he thinks the religious life is the same. They just don't get that not everyone has a perfect life like theirs.
You've got to slap a smile on and get on with it.
And you see how Bednar bullies people, including his description of how he treats his own children, that they bully people into following this perfect path and seeming to be, keeping up appearances. There's an extreme control freakery here. It's really unhealthy, and it's sinister, and they're trying to impose this on the whole church. And that's all they got to offer to save Europe at a time when they need charity, nuance, and a completely different vision for how our spiritual lives can go. All they do is sow fear of the world and tell you if it's going wrong, it's your fault. You know, the usual.
We'll get to that.
And that's
the
a recurring thing.
Peter, the point I was making, though, just with that was that you've got. It's just very distasteful. It's very distasteful when you've got somebody that is very affluent, saying to people, you know, when we know that there are lots of people that aren't in those circumstances. There are lots of people who are members of the church that are worrying about how they're going to feed their children, that are worrying about
they're
how
poor because they're paying for the apostles.
Peter, just let me finish. Let me finish.
Peter, let him finish.
Yeah.
That are worried about those things, and we have the power to stop that. As a church, we could prevent that, but we don't. But we don't. And so for me, that is just the height of bad taste to have somebody that is very wealthy making that statement. You know, we know that ultimately, yes, you know, money doesn't buy happiness. You know, it's kind of a cliche because there is some truth in that. But at a certain level, it does. And we could, as a church, we could buy that happiness of people, but we choose not to.
And that relates to the last point we wanted to make about Nelson's talk before moving to Bednar's before Wendy, was where he described how Brigham Young organised wagon trains of food and other supplies to be sent to these saints who'd had to evacuate from Nauvoo in winter.
Do you want to pop that on? Let's put that clip on.
Yeah, if you've got that quote,
Let's go.
Brigham Young then counseled, quote, "Now is the time for labor. Let the fire of the covenant which you have made in the house of the Lord burn in your hearts like flame unquenchable." Close quote. Within days, wagons, ox teams, food, and other supplies were rolling eastward to rescue the struggling saints.
Yeah, PD wants to say something. PD.
Okay. What he just said there, when he spoke about things rolling eastward to strengthen the struggling saints, correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't hear any kind of help for those saints in Eastern Europe right now who are living under the threat of war. I know they're not here to be political, but there will be saints there who they could have given a message to, even just to say, "You're in our hearts and our prayers. Please stay as safe as you can." You know what I mean? There is a very real risk at the moment of war on the Ukraine border, and there will be members of the church sat there with very big worries in front of them, and they've come specifically to Europe. It's those people they're speaking to. I think even over here in Great Britain, we all would have understood if they'd taken 3 or 4 minutes just to speak to those people who are probably coming to what might be the worst time in their lives.
And they've just been talking about opening up Eastern Europe.
Instead of that, what they did, or what Nelson will go on to do later, is suggest that you should share the gospel, not only those who are in Europe, but those who are going to come to Europe. He makes an allusion to the fact that those refugees coming to Europe, they would be people that, we can try and convert now. The idea that they're out of the water or Middle East where we can't send our missionaries, so let's pounce on them when they come into Europe. Rather than addressing the very real issues that will be having on the church and the threat to members of the church already in the church, like PD very well. But
you speak about the refugees that come across Europe, and if I were in their position, I'd probably do exactly the same thing to protect my family and to escape those situations. So I have no problem with people who are just trying to find a safe place for their family to be. But the church on a local level then has a burden, which there's this whole, if you are Muslim and come from a Muslim country and convert to Christianity, it can help your case to stay in Great Britain or France or wherever, because if you were to be sent back and you had converted to Christianity, then action can be taken against you. And as a missionary here in Great Britain, I had many investigators who were in that situation, and the stake president refused to allow them to be baptized because they were worried about the headlines of Mormon church, baptizes 10 asylum seekers who can now stay in Britain because they got baptized into the Mormon church. In Salt Lake, they'd love it because they want the numbers. It's just about a number on a sheet. But locally, it causes issues for local leaders to deal with. Sorry.
Absolutely.
No worries. I also saw this a bit differently in that this comment was acknowledging that actually, I think it's fair to say the majority of people who join the church in European countries are not Europeans. It is migrants. It is people who are studying as students. It is people from more Christian cultures in West Africa and so on, who are the vast majority of our converts. There are very few, in a sense, ancestrally European people being converted. So I saw that as maybe not even just referring to refugees, but an acknowledgement that a lot of people from other countries join the church here, and you can view that as then seeding their home countries. A lot of Chinese people in Portsmouth, for example, have joined the church and then gone back. And
Manchester, where I was a student, they now have a Chinese ward at the YSA building.
Yes. Yeah, and we had a convert from Nepal who's now one of the few members of the church in Nepal, and so I think that I think he sees that global vision of taking that opportunity. But there is also this sense of preying on the vulnerable, people who are dislocated. I mean, missionaries are told in the past they've looked at obituaries in newspapers to find people who are recently bereaved and vulnerable, and they think, pounce on them, more spiritual at a moment of crisis. And often it is people who are seeking community in a strange land who are drawn to the love bombing they will get at a Mormon chapel. But the problem with that is it's not a sustainable dynamic, because those people are the most likely to be transient and keep moving on. So you never build the local wards, you don't build the local leadership, and you burden. So our last ward, Welling, had a massively high convert baptism rate in the multicultural area of London, but very little retention, and most of the converts would move on quickly. So we never built local strength, or it was very rare to. And we have a religion that doesn't reach the middle classes, who you need as the stable backbone of a local congregation. So I just thought that was an intriguing little comment. It's touching on a much bigger issue that we face.
Right. Wendy Nelson.
Wendy.
Right. Okay.
The gift that keeps on giving.
The irony of this next clip? Everyone, check it out.
To talk with you in Europe about truth and prophets. In the literary folktale, The Emperor's New Clothes, by Danish author Hans Christian Andersen, swindlers convince the emperor that the new attire they made for him is of the most exquisite pattern, material, and colors. They emphasize that anyone who cannot see the extraordinary clothing is unworthy of his office or simply stupid. Everyone is duped by the charlatans, even the emperor's most trusted officials. All the townspeople join in the chorus telling the emperor how magnificent he looks as he proudly parades in front of them. No one wants to be thought of as stupid. However, one child boldly proclaims, "The emperor has no clothes on." And that was the truth.
That is the truth, Wendy. Your husband is naked. He has no clothes on.
Oh, don't put that image out there.
You're welcome, everybody. Good night. What do we think of the ultimate irony that is the wife of the prophet?
I can't comment because
I have a
your
theory.
language restrictions.
Yeah.
Nemo.
Okay. I did have short-term Tourette's. I have got a theory if in a bit.
Mm-hmm. No, go for it now.
Do you go for it now? Okay. So it might be out there, but I've noticed recently that there's been a kind of reclaiming of some of the ex-Mormon verbiage. So I've noticed some conferences where people are talking about putting things on the shelf, which is a well-known term that ex-Mormons use. I can't remember. There's another one that I had. But this is another a term that we talk about the Emperor's New Clothes. We use it as an analogy.
Yeah.
Is she wittingly saying this? Is she being deceptive? Or is it part of the inoculation process? I.e., if you get people used to that analogy linked with a positive narrative for the church, when they then hear it on the other side by an ex-Mormon, is it not as effective? I don't know.
Yeah. They might think, I've already heard this over the pulpit, so I'm not bothered.
Yeah, I've had similar situations where when I moved away from the church, I had evangelical friends that were talking to me about counterfeit and how, you know, Mormonism was a counterfeit, and that you know, Satan will give you 9/10 of the truth. Well, that was going in one ear and out the other because I'd heard that elsewhere. So I wonder if, you know, part of this inoculation process is they start using some of the terminology that we do in order to plant that and give it a different narrative later on. Could be completely out there, wild conspiracy, just my thought.
I like it. Jane, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah, Okay, so I think there's possibly something else going. I love that. I think that's really interesting. But I think I'm going to have to give this a category of its own, which is just, I'm going to name it Wendy Nelson syndrome. Now, guys, you know, I'm as close to TBM as I possibly can get, right? Mm-hmm. I'm in. I have to say, this was the most bizarre talk I have ever heard in my whole life, and it hurts me to have to say that. This was awful and weird. And we've heard her speaking about the prophet before. She is a testimony of the prophet as a prophet. She also clearly loves her husband. This isn't even a weird mix of the two. This is, it was prophet worship. And I really believe that what she was saying was genuinely how she feels. I don't think she sees any inoculation or any, critical thinking. I genuinely think that's the thoughts of her heart. And it's...
Jane, is it worth pointing out, just before you carry on, just worth pointing out, to give you some context as well, that the hymn that preceded this talk was, "We thank thee, O God, for a prophet."
That's a very good point. It's a very good catch, Julian. Thank you.
And as well, that it's not an off-the-cuff kind of, she wrote it half an hour before. That's a good example. It was from an auto cue. It will have been choreographed, rehearsed.
It's been vetted by someone.
Yeah, and maybe she didn't even come up with the example. Maybe it was a conversation with a speechwriter.
That's what makes what she said next even more troubling.
I know. She took it from the yellow legal notepad that her husband has.
Right,
on the bedside table.
Yes. When so she snuck back in, went into his bedside table, pulled it out. This is a good one. I'll have this.
I think I said in chat, if your wife, if your husband, if your partner spoke that way about you, you would run like hell. It's obsessive and creepy.
No, Julian says he manages fine. He says he does all right.
I think it's how it should be.
But how many movies have you seen where the young man has Playboy in between his textbook? Now, when Wendy leaves the room, she doesn't know what's in there. Naked Rusty.
We just got rid of that image. Just to push the conversation on a little bit, I do want to just show the next clip.
What did she say next?
So I've added a compilation to this next clip.
So many things.
Just to point out immediately how false what she said was.
Difficult to know who speaks the truth. But my testimony is that prophets of God always speak the truth.
We were halfway to our destination when the right engine suddenly exploded, spewing flaming fuel all over the right side of the plane. The plane was on fire, careening to the earth in a spiral dive. I expected to die.
From the beginning of time, there has been no attempt on the part in any way of the church leaders trying to hide anything from anybody.
Let me say about electric shock treatments at BYU. When I became president of BYU, that had been discontinued earlier, and it never went on under my administration.
We're talking double-digit stakes every week of our lives.
While many in the world's great and spacious building convincingly profess that evil is good and good is evil, prophets speak the truth.
Do they now? Discuss.
Not really.
You know, I spent all of this talk. I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say it is the most bizarre thing I've ever heard. Even in church testimony meetings.
If everybody gets a chance, go and listen to it all. Do listen to at least hers.
Laura, exactly.
About 20 hours.
The whole thing is bizarre from beginning to end. And really, you know, we were joking, but genuinely, we could talk for hours about this alone. Now, while I was chuckling and, you know, highly amused, shocked at some of the things that she was saying, you know, whenever you play that compilation, Nemo, it actually just re-emphasizes how angry we should be about this. This is completely unacceptable. If you are going to make a declaration like that, do you know what? I'm just horrified. I'll come back later, guys. I'm really, really upset. I'm really upset.
The compilation are people that are, you know, in the first presidency and high up now. We're not even going back into the archives.
No. One of those men is her husband, the man she's worshipping.
Doesn't this come back to the same thing of ultimate truth and ultimate authority, that they have to toe the line of they don't lie or they don't know they're lying because they can't be wrong, because if they're wrong, then the church might be wrong. You know what I mean? It comes back to the whole, you need us to be right because it's us you're following. And if we're wrong, if the veneer cracks, then why are you here?
Exactly. And I could take that. I could take, you know, the perspective where it just requires a shift in perspective. You're not intentionally lying to us. You know, the kinds of things that I try to comfort myself with as I try to get my head around the fact that something is staring me in the face and it is just not true. For to say this a matter of weeks after someone is dishonestly telling me that gay people weren't harmed by electrical shock therapy on your watch. Now, one thing I demand of my church leaders, I demand that you get to be accountable. If you tell me you're telling the truth, if you tell me that you're going to have expectations for how we look after each other, then I expect truth, and I expect you not to be bloody lying to me, and especially not lying about the fact that you're lying. But when then someone can stand up, and because I love the prophet or I have a testimony of the prophet, I will close my eyes to that and declare that prophets always speak the truth. That offends me.
It should. And she also then declared, and we'll throw this in the mix as well.
Prophets can see things we don't see and hear things we cannot. The Lord speaks to his prophets, instructing them what to say and do that will bless and protect all of God's children.
We didn't have revelation there was going to be a pandemic.
Protect God's children. We didn't have revelation there was going to be a pandemic.
Prophets can see,
but if you listen to
Wendy, don't see.
Exactly. Go on.
But if you listen to Wendy even talk about the pandemic a little bit later on, give her 6 months, 10 months, she retrofits it. So
did we just lose Laura there?
Yeah.
I think we just lost Laura. Okay, we'll put her in when we get back. But
President Nelson said later, we never know what tomorrow will bring. Like, that's his job.
Well, I mean, I wish I'd added it in, but he said at the beginning of an April conference, he said, little did I know that the COVID pandemic would make this so memorable for me. Why didn't you know? You're asking me to trust you. You're asking me to put faith in you. I can prove that you've lied, and you can't even do the one thing that you're really meant to be able to do, which is prophesy and see what's coming. Laura, have we got you back?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what you heard me say, but I've said it's interesting how it's actually Wendy that retrofits this story afterwards. You give her 6 months, 10 months after the pandemic starts, and she declares, I think she was in a broadcast with Sherry Jew, that that President Nelson had cleared his diary. And she didn't know why, and he didn't really know why, but it was a foretelling of the pandemic. And so that comes in the April, no one knows anything about the pandemic, but give her 6 months, 10 months down the line, she then comes out with this. So she's known, for this retrofitting.
It's really horrible. It's a horrible talk, and I don't know what other clips you've got there.
We've got one more.
Nemo, but one more for Wendy.
For Wendy, yeah.
Do you want to play it?
Yes, please. Yeah. My pleasure, Julian.
I don't want to give it away. You give us the clip.
This clip is entitled Exclamation Points and Question Marks. Let's go.
Social and otherwise is filled to overflowing with ideas that are contrary to the teachings of prophets. In fact, so much that is offered as truth is just silly, much like the emperor's new clothes. However, prophets help us discern specious notions, as well as their intention to trap us, trip us up, and basically wreck our lives. So how can we protect ourselves amid the war of words that rages all around us? I suggest we compare anything and everything we read, view, or hear with the teachings of the prophets. If it isn't in harmony, we should run away. The question we can use as a litmus test to discern truth from error and to help us with a multitude of our personal dilemmas, decisions, and questions is, what do the prophets say? Let's start there. Let's use prophetic words as our standard of truth. For this new year, let's put an exclamation mark after every statement from a prophet and a question mark after everything else we read, see, or hear.
But you're not in a cult. I promise you. Julian, please.
So when I heard this first time round, I was annoyed and just flabbergasted. And now I'm furious. I am furious. And my only hope is that the people that still go to church, that I love and care about, also listening to it and thinking that's just mental, and it's so full on that I think there's a good chance that a lot of them, especially the young ones, will see that just go, that's mental. It's so irresponsible to say, to make that statement. What is it she says? Many of the things out there proffering to be true are just silly. And
silly.
Especially when you think about what's been going on recently. I'll give them credit. We had them in the video. They were all wearing masks when they weren't speaking, which was clearly a PR thing because they were both sitting next to their spouse. They were separated from each other, sitting next to their spouse. I'm assuming they don't wear them, in bed. So that was clearly a PR thing. I don't want to know.
A whole new another thing, I think.
But with everything that's going on now, so many people just not knowing where to turn on certain points when it comes to things like the pandemic, and they're saying, well.
And she said another line that was even more so exactly what you're talking about, Julian. She said, question everything the world's media and all other sources offer you.
So she's
that's
giving
the conspiracy theorist manifesto.
Yeah.
Honestly.
She's giving them permission to distrust everything. In fact, she's not even giving them permission. She is encouraging them. Put a question mark after everything else. She's encouraging them to distrust everything other than what the prophet says.
They are so desperate for the prophet.
Scaremongering as well.
Yeah, they're so desperate for the prophet to be listened to because so many Desnat types have not been getting vaccinated, not been wearing masks. They would rather encourage that part of them that distrusts mainstream media. They would rather encourage that in those people just to get them to listen to what the prophet says. And I think it's wildly irresponsible.
This is really, exactly. Considering what her background is, she's supposed to be in a therapy kind of background. She's supposed to be mindful. And I mean, it is totally responsible when you take that kind of messaging and then you marry it with what President Nelson says, because he talks about gathering of Israel and this whole kind of prepper kind of terminology.
He talks about the end days coming.
He does quite a lot. So yeah, I think that.
I just think someone needs to tell that Donald Trump came up with fake news about 6 years ago. And when she said to take prophetic words as your like standard of truth, I heard the bar drop so low that it clanged on the floor and rolled away.
Yeah. Well, she said, compare the words of prophets. I'm comparing them to the words of other prophets, and they're not matching up. So what am I to do? Sorry, Julian, please. I've cut you off before. Carry on, please.
It's a really good point, Nima. I wanted to say to her, can we have an example? Give me an example. Yeah. All of these things that people are saying that are out there that are just plain silly, that'd be really helpful to have an example so we know what you mean, because surely you don't want us to question everything. Surely not. You don't want us to question everything. So you give us an example. And then she makes that statement about a social landscape that celebrates sin. I thought
that was her husband later.
Or was it? Was it Nelson that said that? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, she said similar things when she talks about the great and spacious building and all of that stuff. You think, but also Bednar did as well, didn't he? He was talking about increasing confusion and commotion and disorder. What this really negative view of the world that just others everything else. That's what this is. It's a massive exercise in just othering the rest of the world, saying we're Israelites. We'll come on to that later as well. You know, we're the chosen people. Don't trust anything that anybody else says. It's horrible, absolutely horrible.
But she gave the half kind of commitment, didn't she? She said for the next 30 days, take everything that the world says, everything that you have, put a question mark next to it. And then everything that comes from a prophet, put the exclamation mark there. And then she promised them, you know, you will be less stressed, you will be happier, and all of these things.
And I just will be warm and fuzzy.
Well, so you know what I'm going to do? Will be. In 30 days' time, I over the next 30 days, I'm going to be watching his official Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I'm going to see what he says. And then in 30 days, I'm going to see if anything of substance has been said, because these people must not be listening to anything else but him. It's just like when they did the Give Thanks campaign and then none of them participated themselves. Laura, you've got your hand, please.
No, I was just putting it to the square. No, I'm joking.
Oh, thank you.
You're going to rebuke him.
Yeah. No, along that line, the idea that she said, this will make you feel a lot better. You'll you won't be as anxious. You know, crikey, living in a world where you are just following what the prophet said, or any one of the prophets, even though they contradict each other. How confusing is that? Talk about gaslight. And it's gone again. Oh no, 30 days. The last time we were told to have almost like a 10-day strike from social media. We had a social media fast. Yeah. We had a lot of things that were going on with President Nelson's family in the media. I don't know what the ins and outs of that or what the end result was of that, but at the time, that was obviously something that coincided with the masking, particularly women, to stay off of social media for 10 days, and that kind of played out in the background of American TV. So I'm wondering, over the next 30 days, it'd be interesting to find out
BYU is getting investigated over its attitudes towards LGBTQ students. That's currently coming up. Jane?
This is part of the difficulty that we have, is that we, like you say, if there's not really anything of substance that's being said anyway, if we're looking to President Nelson to answer the questions that we've asked, the amount of pressure that's been put on the church to speak about LGBTQ policies, that have been, to speak about women in priesthood, to speak about, some of the massive issues of the day. And it's crickets. We saw huge amounts of racism, bigotry online, horrific things being said, to the point where members are asking, isn't there going to be discipline, surely, for the people who are stirring up this kind of hatred? Crickets, when we are desperate for the church to provide answers on some of the issues that are hurting members of the church most and those that we love. You're not saying anything. I can't put an exclamation point in front of, it's just another keep your covenants talk. Give me something I can work with.
So we'll see.
Also said,
this is my message. 30 days, see what you do. Julian.
She said she was talking about her husband, and she said, I'm paraphrasing now, but she said words to the effect of, he's the kind of person that would never even ask, is the prophet speaking as a man or as a prophet? Would never even ask that. So we're not even allowed to consider whether, we don't need to worry about that because that's just his view. Everything that he says, he's speaking as a prophet.
Because his church broke.
Yeah. So this is a narrative that's been going on since 1982. Rusty Nelson was introduced to the world when he was a surgeon and a regional representative in 1982. In the August 1982 Ensign, there was a major interview with him. And the subtitle they gave it, and his final paragraph was, I never ask myself when a prophet speaks whether he's speaking as a prophet or as a man. This distinction we've all been taught to cope with the fact that they get things wrong. Oh, he was just speaking as a man, not a prophet. And we were trained, I was all my life, that you have to look out for when they claim to be speaking for the Lord. Thus saith the Lord. He said, and President Benson in his 14 fundamentals said, no, they're always speaking as a prophet, whatever they say about anything whatsoever. And he was going for that totally. He said, I put a question mark. I never put an exclamation, a question mark next to the words of the prophet. I always put an exclamation mark, i.e., I'm not going to bother my little head about even thinking there needs to be a distinction between when our church leaders are speaking for themselves or on behalf of the Lord, which is completely sinister. This clearly flagged him up as juicy recruitment material to his seniors, because from then on he was fast-tracked up the ranks. Here's one of the people we want, these unconditionally obedient people. And this was reiterated when he became president of the church, that Elder Anderson quoted this quote in his sycophantic talk about the prophet. And here we've got Wendy doing the same again. So this is a narrative which they keep coming back to, that they're offering President Nelson as an example of unconditional, unquestioning obedience to the prophet. And as Elder Anderson said, and look, this humble man, now he's the prophet. If you're this obedient, you might be able to be. And in the sense, encouraging all of us to model that. But then we have the jarring contradiction that he began his ministry by throwing the two previous prophets under the bus over their I'm a Mormon campaign and shaming everybody. So obviously he was questioning those men the whole time. It's an absolute lie that President Nelson, that Russell M. Nelson as a person never questions the prophet. He spent 30 years sulking massively because they didn't agree with his talk in 1990 or whenever it was about the name of the church. And he went for it with vicious vengeance as soon as he had the power to do so. So this is nonsense. Mm-hmm. This is an absolute travesty to claim that he models unquestioning obedience to the prophet, because he started his ministry as president of the church with a diatribe against the last two prophets, speaking as men and not for God, in his opinion.
Do you know who else are really good at unquestioning, unwavering obedience? Suicide bombers.
Well, yeah. Hey.
Putting it out there.
And this is what I've said to people in the past.
Thought control.
When people say that their feelings for the church are so strong that they know it's true. And I said to the people in the past, Julian, everyone has strong feelings about anything, and unfortunately, some people have so strong feelings they're willing to do horrible things. You know, when you compare yourself, because I think a lot of Mormons think that people who go to other churches don't quite feel the spirit the way they do, because they're at the true church. You know, that they don't quite have that sparkle and that testimony and different things. But I would say that the guy at the down at the church where the band's rocking out and he's clucking like a chicken, but in his day job he's an accountant, he is clearly feeling more spirit there than all the Mormons sat singing "Follow the Prophet" in church. You know what I mean? Like, they think that there's some great thing that they're feeling, but it's really not. But Russell M. Nelson was just church broke as hell, and I think,
or pretending to be.
I think that anytime they speak or anything that is written that is prefaced with their title as a prophet, as elder, then we should take that as them speaking as a prophet. When they're sat in the restaurant reading the menu, yeah, they're speaking as a man. But when they stand up and it's Elder Bednar who's speaking, President Nelson is speaking, then those words should be considered as prophetic because they come from an apparent prophet.
It's the standard I use.
I think this is part of our Mormon church needs for something to be either true. Or, we speak about true so often. I don't know if there's that many other religions other than cults that are so obsessed with this leader is, it's true. Everything this person say, the assumption is, well, why would it not be? My husband is sitting over across the other end of the room. Never Mormon. He doesn't lie. He tells the truth. It's part of how his character. It's actually an assumption that I have with most people that I meet, that you're going to be truthful. People generally, I don't know, unless you're in a political class, I guess that all sort of gets a bit problematic. But I mean, come on, why do we have to be so obsessed with? Okay, what was the quote? Prophets always tell the truth. Well, shouldn't we expect that? Why does that have to be an official declaration?
It's almost like, yeah, you protest too much.
Because we come from a culture of double speak. And whenever I meet a Mormon, I met one today who was from the ward where I was bishop years ago. And he started talking to me and I automatically started thinking, what is your ulterior motive? Have you already thought, oh, I've bumped into PD and I can try and get his new number so I can see him again? It's so ingrained in us to do missionary work all the time, to bring the less actives back, that we were constantly couching the truth, hiding our true intent. That now that when I meet people, I don't know that I can trust that they are genuinely interested in my well-being, or if they just want to be able to say something at ward council.
This is how state of affairs.
I just hope that it was just that her whole talk was just so strong that it would just set everybody's cult detectors.
Where's your cult center, Julian?
Yeah.
You've got one. Is it gone bonkers?
Ding, ding, ding.
It's upstairs. I had to put it away. Right? When I was actually playing it, I had to put it away because I couldn't hear anything else. It's scary because that is the things that she was saying there is exactly the rhetoric that is used to create religious fanaticism.
Yeah, it creates zealotry and fanaticism.
Yeah, exactly. Trust these people completely.
Yeah.
Don't trust the other sources. The world is a dangerous, dark place that wants to do you harm. It's the rhetoric of fanaticism.
Oh, good. I want to move on to Russell M. Nelson's talk, if I can, because I feel like we could go on this point for a long time. I want to talk about the debt of gratitude that he says that the church has. So he started in the way that many of the church leaders, when they come to Britain and they come to Europe, start. He talked about his ancestors. His 8 great-grandparents all came from Europe. and he talks about how wonderful the European saints are.
What I am today, without those 8 stalwart souls whose faith propelled them to leave Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and England. Further, the Lord's Church would not be doing what it is today without the infusion of resilient, faithful, covenanted European saints who came by the thousands to the United States to bolster the church while it was still in its infancy. Every member of the church today, in every land, owes a debt of gratitude to the pioneers who came from Europe.
So, question number 1, how were they covenanted, i.e. under covenant, beyond baptism, because there was no temples in Europe in these early days he's talking about? They would have had to go to get their endowment in the States. And then secondly, we know we're awesome. We know we save the church. We're very aware of it. We talk about it very frequently. You don't need to remind us. You need to show that gratitude that you say you owe us by not abandoning us to fall apart, by not lying to us, by not being dishonest with us. Go.
I think they could have...
This is a bit of an insight into how bizarre my mind is. But when I was listening to that, I just had this image of... I'm gonna assume that all of you lot and anyone that's watching this is familiar with the Harry Potter films and books, and I just had this kind of image of, you know, the hippogriff in is it Prisoner of Azkaban?
It is.
That they have to kind of bow to first and show some depth. You know, it's this wild animal that cannot be ridden unless they kind of bow and show that deference. And then once they've done that, then it's like, okay, it's time now, and we can kind of pet him and then climb on his back and go for a spin. It's almost like they do that. When they come over, it's like, okay, we're all just, they walk into the room and we're all just kind of talking amongst ourselves, not paying them any attention. And they go, my granddad's from Britain. And we go, okay, you've got us now. Listen, his granddad's from Britain. Suddenly now we're tamed and we're receptive to the message. Yeah, sorry. That's just how my mind works.
I was just going to say that if they're that kind of grateful for us, what they could have done is reduce the tithing rate just in Europe. They'd be like, you saved the church, so we can save you a little bit. You can do 7%. Yeah, you know,
or build us a university to send our children to.
Yeah. Or just for Britain. It's like we do here in the United Kingdom with Scotland. We give them more because they shouted louder. Sorry, I'm just joking, Jane. She'll kill me later. But it's that whole calculation, isn't it? So whoever sent the most pioneers, that depends how many temples you get and what your tithing rate is. So there could be no members here, but
Jane, I will let you respond to that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let it slide. Your words. I've listened to Wendy, and I am feeling pretty zen. So your words have no power over me today. But no, again, I'm gonna just pop it in like I do every general conference time. Every time we hear all of this wonderful ancestor worship, there is no temple in the land that you are telling us that your ancestors came from. Scotland, Ireland, Wales, no temples.
Yeah, absolutely. And so he looks to Europe. He looks to Europe and says, "I'm not naive." I was very excited when he started to say, "I'm not naive. You know, I'm not naive to this." This is what he said.
Feeling among some people that religion is dying in Europe. Secularism is indeed flourishing in many parts of the world, and Europe is no exception. I am not naive about that reality. But, brothers and sisters, never forget that the restoration of the gospel commenced so that all men and women might know that it is true. The restoration took place so that all could have the privilege of understanding the magnificent breadth and depth of the Lord's gospel in its fullness. The gathering of Israel, foretold throughout Scripture, is occurring right now in every nation. That includes those of Europe. Now that may seem counterintuitive. In some of our European wards and branches, a relative few are carrying the weight of leadership and activity. Baptisms are not always plentiful, and the social landscape too often celebrates sin.
Now, what I do want to say is we did finally get what we wanted. We have the prophet of the church acknowledging that religion, which he therefore must admit includes our church, is falling apart. And he admits that the same 8 people, which is a very common idea within Mormonism, the same 8 people do, most of the work. He admits that that's what's going on. You look around you, you will see that. So he acknowledges that. But here's the switcheroo. Don't forget there is a promise that the gospel will get to everyone. So, that might happen in the future. And I'm gonna go straight to Peter on this.
It's our fault.
Because I know how passionate you feel about the downfall of the church in Europe.
Yeah.
Take it away, my friend.
Okay. Well, for a start...
Under the table.
So for a start with the resources we were talking about, I was checking out the curriculum for next year. They are going to charge everybody for their Come Follow Me manuals.
No.
So everyone, rather than the church with its $140 billion, next year, if you want a Come Follow Me manual for your family, you're going to have to buy it. That's how stingy they're being. They're asking more and more sacrifices, and they're taking, not giving to us. Go on.
Not in Europe though, because they love us so much. We get them free, right?
No,
the rest of the world is part of the calculation.
No. It's
That's
everywhere.
Incredible.
So this is how pathetic it is. They still got this scarcity myth, that they can't. They're just less and less. They're giving us less and less, like literally in ward budgets and all the rest of it. And my state president, who I've spoken to recently, has done well in a sense, asking for humanitarian aid money and got it, but no one else is. We've still got 5 million gifted from the British Saints sitting in, and they're announcing that the way to help Tonga is to give more to humanitarian aid. Well, Tonga's blown up. We've got £5 million. They can have that, but they won't. So this idea of just this descent and decline. We just spent a few of us spent a weekend at Thrive in Bristol this weekend, communing with ex-Mormons and people in nuanced positions in the church and giving each other support. And I was chatting to one of our listeners from Wales, and he was just documenting for me ward after ward that used to have 100 members, 150 members, being closed down, and the numbers he was giving now for active members was 30. 20, 40, 30, 30, 30. And he was just listing off all these wards in Wales. We are absolutely at the last gasp. Before COVID, we worked out from the leaked data that 14% of members are active in the British Isles, and the data is similar across Europe. My neighbouring state, Maidstone, has announced that during COVID, they've lost a further 20% of their active membership, which has probably been replicated across the region, which would mean in reality now we only have 11% of members of the church are active in Europe. So I loved, as I said earlier, that he mentioned there this growth mindset. Every ear should hear the gospel, but he has no clue whatsoever and is offering nothing whatsoever to actually turn this around, to accomplish that. If we're going to accomplish that, you have to engage the young. You have to deal with the reason most of the adults are leaving, which is the dishonest history and their current corruption about the money. Person after person, I've spoke to several people who were Latter-day Saints all their lives and have literally left in the last year or two. And the triggers for them over and over again: gospel topics essays, finding out they were lied to about history, and the money, finding out about Ensign Peak, that they sacrificed and scrimped and saved and denied things to their children, while this church for the last 22 years raked it in and gave it all to the American stock market. And it's that you can't recover from that without addressing those issues. And but he won't talk about them.
He did speak to the youth. He did speak to the youth, and this is what he said to them.
Realize that you have the answers that those friends are seeking. Just think of what you know. You know that Jesus Christ is our Lord, is our Savior, and that his gospel is on the earth, restored in its fullness. You know that Joseph Smith was a prophet, that the Book of Mormon is the Word of God and that prophets walk the earth today. You know that the long prophesied second coming of the Lord is getting nearer every day. And you know that the gathering of Israel is the most important work on the face of the earth today. Nothing else compares with it in terms of eternal significance.
You know.
Yes, you do. You cheeky little rascals. Don't pretend that you don't. You do know. Don't you? Yes, you do.
And Exmo Lex puts this really well when she was talking to John DeLynn. She talks about how Mormonism for many, many people is not a belief system. This is not a game of what we believe. This is what we know and what reality is. This is the way the world simply is when you're inside Mormonism. That's it. That's how. This is just the facts of the matter.
And it's an incredibly fragile bubble.
Yeah, it is. It's very
so
fragile.
Easy to pop that bubble.
And so
all you have to go is online.
You know.
Yeah. But this is why they're terrified. I mean, certainly from Wendy's talk as well, with all this fear-mongering about everything out there whatsoever, they are cacking themselves because they know that literally everywhere you look, every news feed, every Google search, anything to do with Mormonism is spouting the bad news that this church has turned backwards in time into an even more sexist, racist, LGBTQ phobic organization that is digging its heels in, that is hurting its own people, and most of its members have already left.
Banning student protest at the universities.
And that and their only answer is, oh, don't look at any of it, don't believe it. Okay, we know you're going to see it anyway. Don't trust it. Question mark it all. Don't just think about what the prophet says is the only truth, and then you won't have the stress. I mean, it's desperate, isn't it? This presentation to Europe represented the last dregs of utter desperation, and they reached for racism. I don't know if you got the quotes about that, but the other thing he said to these young people, not just that you know, but repeatedly, the blood of Israel runs in your veins, and you are more special, more privileged than any other people on earth. It was precise white supremacist racism.
He said something,
isn't it?
that the phrasing of which I thought was insensitive, personally, as well. Saying the phrase, Europe is still rich with the blood of Israel. Considering what happened to people of Jewish ancestry in Europe within the past 100 years, it's not okay.
It's soaked in the blood of Israel.
Guys, okay. Give Brother Joseph a break, right? Now, I just need to point out, and Sister PD has just pointed this out to me, okay, that the prophet just spoke some pure logic. Whether it's truth or not, that remains to be proven, could be. But he said that every day is a day closer to the long prophesied second coming. And I just want to say that I know that every day is a day closer to the milk going out of date in your fridge. You see, it's the most logical truth going, but he says it with such power and finesse. The long prophesied day of the second coming, because it's never come. It is long prophesied, and every prophet says the same thing. The end is nigh. It's a day closer. It's 1 second to midnight on the clock. He's coming like a thief in the night, and we're still here, aren't we? You know, there are many religions that have prophesied the same thing over and over again, and it'd be great to be proven wrong, just to see it happen. But
he was speaking as a man, not a prophet. Touche.
Jane's got something to say.
Yeah, I can take it's true things. For a lot of members of the church, that's going to be I don't know, maybe answer to a prayer, confirmation, a reminder, something that they will feel like they can hold on to. Whether or not, I mean, let's face it, we can get into sort of the truth claims and whether that's substantive or not. But if we're talking about rescuing the church, for people who are showing up looking for something, that's good for people who are looking forward to second coming. That's something that they're hoping for. That's something that's good. What I'm really struggling with, again, it's coming back to the real substance of what I need from you, President Nelson. And I guess what I'm looking for, if he was here, if PD, if you were interviewing him, you would hold his feet to the fire over that phrase that he used, celebrating sin. What do you mean by that? What is it that you are seeing the world celebrating? Could we speculate on that? Are we talking about it's gay marriage, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the problem. That's the thing we can't get past. And that is why the church is struggling.
Well said, Jane. Well said, Laura.
And just
please.
This flipping of reality,
One sec, Peter.
Oh, sorry,
we've got Laura just jumping in.
That's right, fine. Yeah.
That Peter, you mentioned a bit ago about the blood of Israel. I hadn't thought about it in that kind of way. So that's really interesting. They've recorded it, haven't they? But isn't it gonna go back on YouTube? Do you think that line will make it's not now?
No, it's going to disappear within 24 hours. What we've just watched, they told us beforehand, because I think someone somewhere recorded something and they weren't very happy about it. So they're making it very clear now that these things are not to be kept, and they will disappear. So luckily, it's immortalized. Some of the best bits are immortalized here, and don't you worry, we'll talk about it more.
Okay, I wasn't sure whether they were going to cleanse it up, but that would escape. But
their way of cleansing it is just to get rid of it.
Okay.
Entirely.
So the only other thing I was going to say with this is he mentions a list there of the things that you know. He says that you know about the Lord Jesus Christ, that you know it's his gospel on the earth today. You know about Joseph Smith is a prophet. You know the Book of Mormon is the word of God. Prophets walk the earth in the second coming. Those are the 6 things that he says. Later on, when he talks to the youth, and he says, and if you don't know, then you can use these methods, praying, scriptures, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if this is something you were going to talk about or not, Nemo, but, I don't know, again, I might be looking at this a little bit too much, but considering he's using an auto cue and it's not just talking about it, later on, he then comes up with a list of things that, if you know these things, you have a testimony, but he drops Joseph Smith. He says, if you have a testimony of Jesus Christ is the Lord, his gospel on the earth, Book of Mormon, prophets walk, that we've got a prophet. So Joseph Smith is out of that list suddenly. And I don't know whether he just forgot to say it and it was on the auto cue, but it's interesting to me because that might be the stumbling block for quite a few people. You know, Joseph Smith, what he did, they might still have a relationship with the Book of Mormon. Jesus Christ is fine for them and don't know too much about or listen much to what the prophet says in finite detail. But Joseph is a bit of a stumbling block. The fact that that's out of that equation, and he said, you still have a testimony, even though he's not one on the list, I thought was an interesting idea.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Okay, so what a whirlwind that was. We go into this, we decide that we're going to talk about it beforehand, and we go into this wondering whether we'll get anything of substance. We could have ended up just sat here chatting about... Oh, what happened? What we got? We just lost
She's declared independence.
Okay.
PD, you alienated the Scots. They're gone now.
The Scots have disappeared. So we come into this not knowing whether there's going to be anything of substance to talk about or whether it's just going to be milquetoast and boring. And there was a worry as Sister Bednar was speaking, as Elder Bednar was speaking. We thought, okay, there's a couple of things we can talk about, but nothing really. Wendy came out the park. She came out swinging. She came out swinging with a large baseball bat covered in barbed wire by the looks of it, intent on just doing as much damage as possible. And then we got Russell Nelson doubling down on some of the things she said. And I just want to ask any of you in the couple of minutes we have left, what final thoughts you have about what we've just seen, about what's just happened. Was it historic?
I wonder. You saying what you said about Wendy. Okay, so we know that bishops, okay, they get called, everybody declares their love for the bishop, and then they go through that icky period somewhere in there where everyone gets a little bit miffed up with them, and then you've got the bishop's wife who's incensed because they're trying to protect the bishop, and they, fight with everyone in the ward. And I wonder if Wendy's pissed. People are talking about her husband, and she's like a little bit pissed. And do you know what? The great men and women that surround them can't keep her under control, and she's gonna say her talk was about how wonderful her husband was. She goes on to give a list of attributes that he has that people might want to consider for themselves. She just kind of speaks as if she's a ticked off wife.
No, that's not.
You don't think so?
That's not. She's going for first wife, isn't she?
Oh.
She's trying to. She's trying to. Is it Danzel? She's trying to push Danzel off the top spot. Biggest suck up. She's gonna get the top slot.
I mean, if she wants biggest suck up, she's got to get behind Anderson and Cook. If she wants to win that award.
It's a long list.
Yeah, it's a long list of people that like to suck up to President Nelson. So she's got to join the queue. I don't know if you heard, Jane. We're just giving final thoughts on what we thought of this before I leave us all with a very special goodbye. So, any final thoughts, Jane?
Yeah, the focus obviously had been on temples, covenants, priesthood gathering, things that I think work. Again, though, it's going to come back to the fact for me that I need... When someone in the chat earlier on, I think it was one of our good friends, had talked about how covenants are boring. And yeah, we are really good at making them boring in the church. But what I get really excited about is the fact that when we take sacrament, and as the trays are being passed up and down the rows from hand to hand, from person to person, that as we are making covenants with God, that we are helping each other physically to hold that tray, to move it up and down the rows, and that we are helping each other to keep those covenants and to really come together in that moment before God. And that is so powerful, which means that those people that I'm in the room with, or could be in the room with me, or might ever want to be in that space with me, I've got a responsibility to them. And if my ability to make covenants means that I can't be there with my brothers and sisters, that they are not going to feel welcome, included, or whatever it is, then I cannot. That is not a covenant path that anybody would want to be walking. I guess that's what I wanted to say, and I'm asking, please, if the British rescue is still on church leaders' minds, if you're going to give us something, would you please remember our brothers and sisters who need more than we are giving them right now?
Thank you very much, Jane. That's well said. Peter and then PD.
Sure. I've kind of got three take-homes. One is it was an anti-intellectual diatribe. The one thing the adult and young members of this church need, and it's something that we were starting to experience ourselves in our youth in the 1980s, is a way to be in the world and embrace it and see its opportunities and reach out and save it and be a part of it. And we had that outward-looking attitude after getting over the racism. We were inclusive in much more than today, and we weren't afraid to get out there and argue doctrine and ideas and do our stuff. Now they are living in terror. They are fearing the world. These old men have not got the first clue how to engage with the world and how to resolve that issue, and they're not equipping their young people to cope if all they've got is don't trust anyone, a scientist, someone on the news, a journalist, a member of parliament, anyone. Don't trust any of them, only trust the prophet, and then everything will be fine, because then you'll be in a brainwashed bubble and you won't have to think. When the prophets thought, the thinking has been done. We've absolutely returned to that worst aspect of Mormonism. And the other worst aspect of Mormonism is the racism. He said that these young people in Europe have demonstrated unusual faith in the pre-existence, so they're saved to come to the lineage of the most illustrious, and that they have the talent of spirituality. The reality is the opposite. It's nearly always brown and black people who are more spiritual or religious these days. And that was the attitude we learned in our missions. There's not much point bothering the white people because they're hard work and skeptical. And you will find easier pickings amongst the other races, you know, in part because of they're still in a very religious culture in a lot of their communities. And therefore that has been the reality. So to say that white Europeans are the most inclined to be spiritual racially does not reflect the experience of missionaries in Europe. And it is, but it links to what Nemo's been exploring about the nepotism in the church. They have this intrinsic idea that their bloodlines privilege their families, and that's okay because God's organized it that way. And therefore, of course, we get to be part of that because we're their ancestors. They've emphasized their bloodlines back to Europe. They see themselves as the Israelites, literally genetically the descendants of Israel, against all the genetic evidence, when it should really be the people from the Middle East and Africa and so on. But they don't count because they're white supremacist racists. And we just need to see that in their desperation, all the fig leaves have been removed. This is their intrinsic thought process. They are entitled to their privilege because of their family lineage and their race. And that's why they will keep giving all the callings to their relatives and heaping praise on us, even though we're failing and it's not working. And the final thing is the third thing, just simply what we concluded after the other British Rescue broadcasts. Who's really running the church? Because someone in power knows these people, especially Wendy, are going to talk absolute bollocks when they get in front of a microphone. It's going to be incredibly embarrassing and bad PR. So they must throw this down the memory hole as soon as possible. For the broadcasts, when the apostles came, it survived 3 seconds and then was removed from the internet. Everyone has been warned this will be gone in 20 hours now, 24-hour window. Watch it now, then it's gone. If you genuinely believe that this broadcast was historic, these people really are prophets, and he said the 15 are prophets, prophecies and revelators, you can trust them completely. This broadcast should be preserved on every internet outlet they can find. They own literally billions of shares in all of them, so they could pay for it. They should be like, we own you, Facebook, Microsoft, Google. We literally own billions of shares in your companies. Can you make sure this is the pop-up on all of everyone's news feeds for a week? And they would publish it and post it through every door in Europe, because this is the voice of God, the infallible living prophets to a nation teetering on the brink of spiritual death and Satan. If they really believed a single word that any of these two apostles just said, or their wives, that's what they do. The fact that they cannot wait to get rid of this from the historical record and have it go down the memory hole shows someone else is really running our church and it's not them. And those people realize what a shit show these people are. And just like, what does that tell us? And this is, you know,
well, we're not going to let it go down the memory hole, are we? PD,
we are not.
Your final thoughts.
Yeah. What about Lynn?
Oh, Lynn, please, yes.
Your thoughts, Lynn.
Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm good. I just found the whole talk. I was driving while I was listening to it, and I did almost crash the car a couple of times. It was rather triggering for me. Yeah. So.
Well, as soon as she heard Bednar's voice, she was swearing.
Yeah, I was twitching.
Yes. Thank you. PD, please.
Okay. I just didn't want to follow Peter, so thanks, Lynn. No, but it's a good job Wendy came, because before that it was just vanilla. And I like to record things, as you know, and I like to write things. And I find that when I'm writing and then reading it back, if I'm bored writing it or reading it, then the listener is going to be bored as well. What do these brethren and sisters think when they read back their talks and start proofreading? Because if they're falling asleep during their proofreading process, then what do they think we're going to think? You know what I mean? Like, change it up, guys.
I think that's a bit harsh, PD. That's a bit harsh. Forgetting, we haven't mentioned this. There was that beautiful story about that. I think she said it was an amazing miracle that happened to Sister Bednar when her son got ill, was a bit sick, and then he got better.
Yeah, but it's the same old, isn't it?
What, how amazing!
Yeah. He got worse first. Yeah,
and
it's just like when the lights went out.
His dad, that didn't work, but then later on he got better.
The lights went out at a broadcast. The backup generator kicked in. The lights came back on. It was a miracle from God, PD.
Yeah, I just
your expectations out, son.
They're going to do this over and over again, and we will be here over and over again. We will get better. They will remain the same. There will be no improvement until they get real with themselves and with us and just say it how it is. Yep, the world's in a crap place, so let's talk about all those crap places rather than just go to a generic temple, fulfill this generic calling or this generic covenant. Okay, let's talk about the fact that Russia are eyeing up Ukraine. Let's talk about the fact that gas prices are quadrupling and that you've got to choose whether to heat your house or feed your children, but they just come over with the same old, let's go to the temple because that has eternal consequence. Well, right now I'm just struggling to live, mate. So
can I just jump in? And I know you're wrapping up, but just 100% PD, that is what a real relevant living religion, those are the things I want to hear about. This broadcast tonight for Europe really could have been given anywhere, couldn't it have? Other than the wee history part at the start, but you could have lifted it and given the same talks anywhere. We didn't get updates on how temple building is going or anything really on the ground that's relevant to the church. It became more generic, and I think that's absolutely your insight's bang on the nose.
If I know media at all, the best way to make easy work of all these talks around the world is to have it formatted. So paragraph 1, say something about when you last visited that place. Paragraph 2, say something complimenting the people. And then paragraph 3 through 20 are just the same thing that you say at every stump speech.
Should we write one for them? Maybe that we should write something for them. Do you know what? Something that would have helped them, very simple. Where's Elder Uchtdorf with his aeroplane analogy? Where's Elder Uchtdorf? Would have actually been a lot more sensitive to a lot of these issues. Every, 40 to 60-year-old is in love with Elder Uchtdorf. So, it's going to brighten everyone's day. Where was he?
I think that's a great note to end it on, to be honest, Laura, is that where was the one European apostle? Where was he? I'm gonna say goodbye to you all now, and we'll end it with a lovely little clip from these folks.
Oh, look at that. Isn't it special?
Bye, everyone. Have a great evening. See you later.
See you later.
Thanks, Nemo.